It's not, at least it's not conducive to modern kind of curricula. But it would be necessary because it needs to be done. Because as I often say, I mean, you don't need to teach a collection of facts. I have more facts than in this phone, or access to it in this phone, than you could ever get in school. But there's more misfacts.
So hello and welcome to the Wiser Tomorrow podcast. Today I'm delighted to be speaking with Dr. Lawrence Krauss, theoretical physicist and one of the most prolific science communicators of our time. Dr. Krauss has a special place in my own education, as I grew up attending his lectures and events as early as the beginning of high school and later enrolled in his course while studying at Arizona State University. Lawrence currently hosts his own podcast, the Origins Podcast, where he has spoken with some of the most brilliant minds of our day, covering a broad range of scientific, social, and artistic topics. He has a new book coming out in 2023 titled The Edge of Knowledge, Unsolved Mysteries of the Cosmos, which is now available for pre-order and which I hope we'll get the chance to talk more about today. So again, Dr. Krauss, thank you again for speaking with me. It's great to see you, and there's a lot more that I'd like to talk about than we'll have the time to get to.
Okay, sure. It's great to see you again. And as we were talking about just before we went on the air, you were in my very last class at ASU. So I don't know if that's a distinction or not, but it's
I'll take it as a distinction. I think it is. So I want to start where you start on your own podcast, which is getting a little bit more info about your own origin story. Because as I said, I've followed you for many years and I've collected bits and pieces of information over that time. But I don't know all too much about how you got where you are today and specifically what drew you to science. So if you could speak a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, I mean, how far back do you want to go?
As far back as you're willing to go.
Well, I grew up in Canada, and in a household where neither of my parents had gone to college, and neither had finished high school, in fact, but it was a household where my mother, being a typical Jewish mother, wanted my brother to be a doctor and my brother to be a lawyer and me to be a doctor. Sorry, I was a doctor, he was a lawyer. Anyway, and education was important, moving forward, and it was important to them, and that got instilled in both of us. And as I've often said, my mother made the mistake of telling me doctors were scientists, and I got interested in science. So we also had a neighbor who's an engineer, and I remember that influenced me. His son, I remember making a model of an atom with his son, and that had a big impact. And then really it was reading books by scientists, a book by about Galileo when I was 10 or 11 or 12, that I think got me particularly interested. But I'd already kind of felt like I should be a scientist, but I didn't know really much about what it was. And the Galileo book impressed me as a brave scientist seeking truth, and I think that kind of romantic notion has stayed with me ever since, actually. But it was in high school when I discovered doctors weren't scientists, and I also discovered that physics was much, well, at that time biology was a very different discipline than it is now, and I wish I've learned some biology since then, but it was a lot of memorization in high school, and I wasn't interested in any of that, and so I eventually realized that at that time that I didn't want to do that. I would say it broke my mother's heart, but it didn't really, because for many years she still felt like I was going to be a doctor, even until up to and including when I got my first job at Harvard. She still thought I was going to go back to medical school, I think. And she couldn't understand why I wanted to get chalk on my hands. And anyway, but physics books by physicists had really intrigued me. Although the decision to be a scientist was still kind of vague. I like all academic disciplines, frankly, and I didn't want to specialize. And I had a hard time trying to decide, because I'm also fairly political and involved in human affairs, and therefore I enjoyed history, and I particularly, and I didn't know how to balance that particularly. When I went to university, I actually took a special course that had been developed at that university, which was made. It was called General Science, it allowed me in principle to do history and science, but eventually I decided that the most challenging program was actually doing two majors, one in mathematics and one in physics. That was a unique new program that was created, required me to take a lot of classes. Anyway, I did that, and I did it to 2 degrees, and then happened to get into a good graduate school. I thought of going to Oxford to study philosophy with a Rhodes Scholarship, but I happily didn't do that. And I went to down in the United States to MIT to do my PhD. And I was just, and I this is an important lesson that I think young people should learn. I had no expectations of really getting a job. At that time, it was a very, very bad job environment. So I kind of figured I'd be doing something afterwards, but it was what I liked, and I learned how to juggle and figured I'd drive a taxi and that sort of thing. And anyway, but one thing followed another, and I was lucky enough to get a reasonably good job after that at Harvard, and then moved to teach at Yale, and then continued to move on. But I did take a year off. I should say I took a year off university to work on a history book. Which I was working on, and it was on the Communist Party in Canada in the Depression, and I had access to restricted material that no one had access to. And I still have that box of material. I decided I wanted to get all the first primary source information before people died off, which I did do, and I think my next book's going to finally be putting that one together. So it'll be a nice walk through history. Anyway, so I did take time off to do history, but then I decided physics was what I wanted to do, as long as I could do it. Anyway, and so that's the story of more or less how I became a physicist. I think it was the Galileo book early on, and then in high school, really were other books by scientists, particularly by Richard Feynman and others, and also a book by Sir James Jeans, actually, called Physics and Philosophy, which got me for a while, interested in philosophy. That convinced me that there was a lot left to do in science, and that is one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why I think I've written books, is to return the favor, to excite young people, to and maybe people like you, to go on in careers in science as those people did for me. There are other reasons probably. I like to write, but anyway, that's a long answer to your question, maybe.
Sure.
But if you have if there's other things you want to know about it, feel free to ask me.
Sure. No, I have several follow-ups to that. The first is that, just for example, in preparing to speak with you, I was talking with a few friends who have also followed you for many years, and I proposed I wanted to get their thoughts on a philosophical question. And okay. Their immediate reaction was, he hates philosophy. And I said, no, I think that's been misconstrued. I think he doesn't like when philosophy and science are confused. So I would like to just hear, I think you've gotten a bad rap in terms of a negative sentiment about philosophy, but if you could
probably like
speak on that.
Yeah, it comes probably like many things comes from jokes I made. But
sure.
Obviously philosophy is, we all do philosophy, and philosophy has been a vitally important field in human history. And the whole nature of logical thinking and rigorous analysis is imbued in everything. It's just... it's just there is a difference between physics and philosophy, and the philosophy of science. What people don't understand is when I basically said something which is not pejorative but true. The philosophy of science has, in physics at least, in the current time, doesn't impact on physics at all. It's not read by physicists. It's not as if it's not interesting or important for the philosophers. I don't know. I mean, I've read some philosophy of science. I think history of science probably has more of an impact on physicists than philosophy. So it's not that I hate philosophy. It's just I don't like this notion that somehow physics is being driven by philosophy. It isn't. It isn't anymore. It's grown out of it. That's all. It used to be natural philosophy, and it's grown out of it a long time ago, because it's a very mature discipline. There are other disciplines, like an area that I talk about in my new book, consciousness, where where science and philosophy are intermingled incredibly, because we don't even know the right questions to ask, and philosophy is useful for that. And so you see as much interesting development in terms of ideas of consciousness coming from philosophers as you do from neuroscientists. And, it used to be like that in physics, but that was a long time ago. Physics has moved on and asked its own questions, and there's too much intellectual baggage to follow that follows on philosophy, that you have to be a physicist, and there are some philosophers of science, of physics, who are okay. Well, I mean, there are, I'm sure, a lot that are good, but pretty well all the ones who are, have to have some background in physics at some point. But then the questions they ask are very different than the questions physicists ask in general, and that's the point. So the questions of interest to philosophers are, at this point, are generally different. Anyway, I certainly don't have an antagonism towards philosophy. Not as much as I say, not like my antagonism towards, say, theology, which is an empty discipline.
Yeah.
Anyway, so hopefully, I'm sure that won't ever clear things up, because once you're labeled, you're labeled. But I don't hate philosophy. And as I'd like to say, I have a number of good friends who are philosophers, modern philosophy, especially when it comes to detailed issues of modern consciousness, ethics. I mean, people I know like Peter Singer, who's a friend, and Dan Dennett, and even my friend Noam Chomsky, some would call a philosopher. Anyway.
Yeah, Chomsky, I guess, could be categorized any which way. He's done it all.
Yeah, he does so many different things. He can be categorized, and he's almost often miscategorized, which is probably
of course
the most common feature.
Yeah, it's a common feature, I guess, of anyone in this position generally. Yourself.
Yeah. And and I suppose I should take it as a badge of honor that people mischaracterize my views about a lot of things. And anyway,
they care enough to miscategorize it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
So you touched on consciousness and mentioned that it's going to be in your new book. So if this is a spoiler, feel free to move on. But what is your thoughts in terms of the relevance of physics in the nature of consciousness? Is this ultimately a quantum mechanical, or?
I point out in the book. I mean, no, I don't. I mean, my book covers far more than physics, and the key questions in consciousness. At this point, there's no evidence that have anything to do with physics. There's a few physicists who seem to think somehow the fundamental nature of physics is deeply related to consciousness, and Roger Penrose is one, but I don't see any real evidence of that, nor do I think it's driving the research in the field. So I think all efforts to right now tie physics to consciousness are premature. The only thing that's of mild interest, and at this point, I think the evidence is controversial, or at least the claims are controversial. But the notion of whether quantum processes, quantum coherence, is related in any way to fundamental neural processing, and some people make that claim. I'm very, very dubious about it. But and then there may be something to it, but I don't think there's any solid evidence. I don't think we know enough, and we certainly, when it comes to consciousness, the big question is even defining the term. As I say in the book, as someone pointed out to me, you could tell how much we know about a field by how many books are written about it. The more books that are written, the less we know. And consciousness is a field where every week there's a new book coming out. So anyway.
Sure. So to talk a little bit more about the book, so it sounds like it was a little bit broader than I had previously understood. Again, I don't want to spoil too many things, but if you want to just talk a little bit more about that.
I'm not going to talk too much. We'll talk about it when the book comes out, but I will say it's sort of built on 5 major sections. The fundamental, it deals with the fundamental known unknowns of the universe, the fundamental questions that we all ask. And so there's 5 sections of time, space, matter, and then life and consciousness. So I think that it sort of moved beyond physics, although there's some discussion of physics and chemistry and the origins of life, and then consciousness is more a wide variety of fields from philosophers and neuroscientists. But the key questions: what is consciousness? What is it? What does it mean? How did it arise? Those kind of questions that are fundamental questions. And in each of those areas, I lead people up to what I think is the frontier of knowledge, where we're at, and then point out the key things we don't know, which I think is really important. The things we know we don't know are important, but as I say in the book, the things we don't know are probably more important. But I can't write a book about those.
Sure. I mean, there are so many things that are very interesting. I mean, more than interesting, incredible, that are happening at the forefront of science. I mean, we have the recent launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. We have the LIGO detector. We have ongoing experiments at the Large Hadron Collider, and the list goes on and on. So of all of these things that are happening at the moment, what do you see as some of the most exciting and most promising experiments that are taking place?
Well, you mentioned they're all promising. As I tell people, I don't generally think about things hierarchically. And I was also just thinking, the class you took, by the way, if you think about it, there was a lot more than physics in it in the end. We talked about a lot of aspects of it was based on physics, but we ended up allowing people to talk about lots of aspects of science because they're interconnected. And once again, that's my desire not to compartmentalize things. Science is, especially lately, physics and biology are really getting intertwined in many ways, and maybe in neuroscience. But in terms of the most exciting, the exciting things that are going on, you've labeled them. James Webb Space Telescope every week is coming out with at least new beautiful pictures, and maybe will tell us new things about the early universe and also the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe, which is incredibly exciting. Large Hadron Collider is the great hope, but right now it made a great discovery that changed our picture, or at least confirmed our picture, and for some of us changed our picture, since I never believed the picture before they invented it. But we're hoping that it'll push us through the next frontier to tell us, we have this beautiful standard model of the universe, but it's got many open questions, which I talk about in the book, and we need some data to take us beyond that threshold to tell us what the right direction is. And the hope is that the Large Hadron Collider will do it. It hasn't yet, but doesn't mean it won't, and it's operating again. And there's a lot of other things, a lot of new windows. There's obviously the window of gravitational wave astronomy, which is changing everything, and may give us a signal at some point from the very beginning of time, which would be very important. Would tell us about the possibility that this thing called inflation happens, or maybe reveal aspects of quantum gravity. And there's another new large detector, a radio detector. It's being called the Square Kilometer Array, which is just opening up. We're going to have, I forget, 10 or 100,000 telescopes between South Africa and Australia that are going to be combined together coherently to act like a single telescope. That's the Square Kilometer, and so those are very exciting possibilities. But there's lots of other things going on. There's quantum computing. There's exploiting the weirdness of quantum mechanics in technology in different ways. We already exploit the weirdness of quantum mechanics. It's not as if it's nothing new. Semiconductors and transistors and everything else, and my phone, and our whole technology relies on the weirdness of quantum mechanics at some level. But there are even weirder parts of it, and looking at entanglement and quantum teleportation and cryptography are I think really exciting potential areas, and I emphasize the word potential areas of technology. They're beginning, but one has to, they need there's a lot of proof of concept that needs to be done to show that they can be technologically viable, and so that's one practical area, for example. And then, as I say, the interface, the work in genetics that's going on at a molecular level is going to change the world. And hopefully some of this will actually have an impact on real problems. Like my last book was The Physics of Climate Change, and we need new storage technology, battery energy storage technologies, batteries, and potentially ways of capturing and sequestering carbon. There's lots of applied problems that are incredibly interesting as well. But almost what's great is technology. What's great and scary at the same time is technology is developing so fast that almost all fields are opening up new windows that are changing our picture of the world, and it's just great to watch every single day.
No, absolutely. And I experienced a little bit of what you're referring to myself. As I said, I finished my master's at the beginning of this year, and my master's research was on semiconductor quantum dots. So I got to really, so I got to dig deep into that entire area and see. There's definitely a long way to go, but just my brief exposure taught me a lot.
Good. You probably know more about it than me then. That's good.
Maybe. So another thing, to refer to one of your earlier books, I think it was the first book that I became familiar with of yours, which is A Universe from Nothing. Just for anybody listening who may not have read the book or be familiar with the idea, and you tell me if this is an accurate summary of the fundamental idea behind it. In 1995, you proposed a theory a model based on quantum field theory that essentially said that the energy density of the universe is dictated by the energy of empty space, which we typically conceive of as empty space. And you would argue essentially that empty space is not in fact empty space, but rather a soup of particles coming in and out of existence. So if you could talk a little bit more about that idea, and if you've changed your stance on its viability, let's say.
Well, yeah, let's see. Well, you got some of it right.
Okay.
In 1995, what I did was make a proposal that the dominant energy of the universe resided in empty space. Mm-hmm. It wasn't based actually on quantum field theory. It was based on looking at the evidence of astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology, looking at all the observations that were made. I and a colleague of mine argued that it was inconsistent to have a universe that didn't have an energy of empty space. That was an incredibly heretical idea, because why should empty space have energy? And all estimates of what the energy of empty space would be that you could do from quantum field theory gave vastly incorrect numbers. Numbers would be so high we wouldn't have a universe today. So the conventional wisdom was the energy of empty space was zero, because it was the only other sensible value, even though we didn't know how or why it would be zero. But I argued that the data suggested otherwise. I'd been thinking about that, I should say, for 5 to 10 years. Other people had argued evidence for the energy of empty space being zero, and in every case I showed that evidence was incorrect. So we did it. I did it primarily because I felt like some of the data was wrong, and the idea of empty space having energy was so crazy that it seemed that if I pointed this out, I'd probably point out that maybe we should look at the data in different ways. But it turned out to be right. It was exactly right. In 1998, two different groups came on, and the impact of the energy of empty space would be to cause the expansion of the universe to accelerate, because the energy in empty space is gravitationally repulsive. And they measured that acceleration of the universe, and it turned out to be exactly the value that we had predicted, more or less, or that we argued was consistent. And it was a very important discovery. They won the Nobel Prize for it in 2011, I guess. But it was not based on fundamental physics in that regard, because we don't really understand the fundamental physics of empty space at that level. We don't understand why empty space has energy. It's a mystery, and why that has the value it has is the biggest mystery in physics, I think. But what it does tell you is that empty space is not so empty. I mean, there's nothing there, but it's got energy. And that is does reflect a property of quantum field theory, that empty space has virtual particles popping in and out of existence. And it suggests we need to rethink what many people think of nothing, like empty space is nothing. But more than that, when you combine it with ideas from general relativity, what I pointed out is that that it's possible not just that particles pop in and out of empty space, but spaces themselves can pop in and out of existence. Whole universes can pop in and out of existence, and that can presumably happen. And it's possible that our universe popped into existence spontaneously. And then if you ask what would be the characteristics of a universe that popped into existence spontaneously and survived for 13.8 billion years, what would characteristics be? More or less, the characteristics are exactly the ones we observe in our universe. And that doesn't prove it, but it's highly suggestive, and it also appealed to my predilections of the fact that being able to create a universe without any supernatural shenanigans, having a universe arise spontaneously, is very attractive to me, because I see no evidence of intelligence, and now we know that it seems counterintuitive to imagine that a universe that now has 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, that such a thing could arise from nothing, because it seems like it violates the conservation of energy, among other things. And it turns out it doesn't, and that's fascinating. And I wanted to use that as a hook to explain the really profound developments in cosmology over the last 40 years since I've been a scientist. Because certainly when I started, my first faculty position after Harvard was at Yale, and people at that time, my colleagues in astronomy, basically felt we'd never be able to answer these fundamental questions of these characteristics of the universe. We wouldn't be able to answer that observationally. So all of that has changed, and I think it's so exciting that I wanted to communicate it. So that was the idea behind that book, and then the discussion that our universe could come from nothing, because it's a nice continuation from Darwin, right? Look, you used to think you had to have divine intervention to have all the different species on Earth, and you don't. Now, we don't know the origin of life, as I talk about in the new book. I talk about what we do know and don't know, as the book's writing, but we do know you certainly don't need any divine intervention to create frogs and alligators and dolphins and humans. And it's a nice evolution to know that, because modern cosmology suggests that you don't need any divine intervention to even create the diverse features of our universe. And that's interesting, it seemed to me.
I would certainly agree, and clearly there are many others who also agree. I wanted to get to all of your work and, I guess, advocacy in terms of the atheist movement that was quite prominent in the latter half of the last decade. I'll give you one piece of very interesting information I got recently. I spoke with another professor from ASU who's with the School of Religious Studies, and he studies religion in America, mostly from a sociological standpoint. And one piece of data that he told me that shocked me is that atheists still today have some of the lowest appeal as a political candidate, namely a presidential candidate. And over the last several years, pretty much every other group has improved dramatically. I mean, the increase in appeal and favorability for Muslims, Jews, Christians, every ethnic group, every flavor of every person except for atheists. And that, I mean, just for transparency for anyone watching, I share more or less all of your stances on atheism. I would agree uniformly. So for me, that's just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, yeah, it's not. That's been long-standing. I mean, I don't know if it's gotten worse, but I described once a bunch of years ago a study that had been done of, I think, 1,500 college students and some adults as well in the Pacific Northwest in Canada, and the people that were trusted the least were atheists. That included murderers and all sorts of people, and it was really kind of amazing. I know that's funny. I had a friend of mine she's a comedian, and she was on Saturday Night Live a long time ago. Julie Sweeney, who talks about coming out, and she said that when she told her mother she was an atheist. That's what I meant by coming out.
Yeah.
Told her mother she was an atheist. Her mother said, "An atheist? Oh God, I can see you not believing in God, but an atheist."
Yeah.
But somehow that term has some kind of pejorative meaning, and I don't label. It's not. I don't like labels anyway. And for a while I labeled myself, because of my late colleague Christopher Hitchens, as an anti-theist, which I think is how he described himself. And that's true, but that's really inappropriate too. I think what I moved to, and it's really more characteristic of the attitude of almost all scientists, but I call myself an apatheist, because God never enters into any discussions in any science. It just never come up in 40 some odd years of doing science. It's just not an interesting question, and so it's not something we need to spend so much time debating, I think. So I don't like to spend a lot of time. I mean, when people talk about movements, I hate the idea of an atheist movement. An atheist is just, someone who doesn't find the evidence for God convincing. And that includes, by the way, not just people that you would call atheists, but people who like to think of themselves in the middle somewhere. Don't use that label, atheist. And but they are effectively atheists, even though they call, I forget the term now. My mind is gone. But for people who aren't religious, but don't call themselves atheists. Anyway, they are atheists, because atheist doesn't mean you strongly believe in anything. It just means you don't find the evidence convincing, and so that's fine. But I think I can understand the movement and the fact that people love to be surrounded by others who can openly say that. And I think that for me was the biggest revelation when I when I made that movie with Richard Dawkins on the Unbelievers. I got a lot of I'd spoken out against religious fundamentalism, and for a long time, and I think it's awful in every kind of religion. It's awful. Religious fundamentalism is pernicious, but what I hadn't realized was how pernicious a much more subtle intrusion of religion on our moral, the monopoly on moralization that religion seems to have. Because I got letters from people from small towns and other who said, "Wow, it was great to see the movie," and see that I'm not alone, first of all, and it's okay to ask questions because these people are in communities where you can't ask a question. I mean, everyone asks the question, but they can't say it out loud. Is there a God, or what is the evidence? But if you do it, you're reviled, and your children are reviled, and that's the worst part, is that people feel that simply questioning makes them evil people, and that's the worst thing. And so it's that aspect that I think is pernicious, and that's the only reason to have these big meetings of atheists that are popular, I think, is to show people that, hey, other people are that way, and people can be moral, people can be different, many different facets, and still say that, hey, they don't buy this God thing. It's no big deal. It's just not a big deal, and it shouldn't be a big deal. That's the only reason I think that popularizing it is important. Unfortunately, these movements, like many movements, then become dogmatic, and I've seen it happen in the in the atheist quote unquote movement. You have these groups hating other groups and demanding kind of adherence to certain principles, and then castigating if the people who represented atheism didn't reflect their own whatever identity, they're upset. And I've seen that against me and others, hatred develop because of these ridiculous identity things that are so dominant in our society right now. And so I think that what it demonstrates is a kind of innate religiosity, that even people who aren't religious kind of have a secular religion where they want to believe something, and certain ideas can't be questioned. And so that's my take on atheism right now.
Yeah, sure. I had I remember one time after I went to one of your events with Richard Dawkins, and being an edgy atheist teenager, I had my book signed by you, and of course the first thing I did is post it on Instagram, very excited. And because I had used hashtags with your name and some keywords, I had people from a bunch of places around the world happen to pick up the post and comment, and there were people from all over, but typically the Middle East, who were saying, I'm so jealous, I'm not even allowed to have these books in the first place. And that was one of the moments where I was just struck, like the idea that I could get in trouble legally or just socially for having these ideas in written form is disturbing,
Yeah, it should nothing is sacred. Nothing should be sacred. And that used to be sort of obvious in a religious sense, but it needs to be said even in a non-religious sense. Nothing is sacred. No claims about this or that are sacred and cannot be questioned. And and unfortunately, I see you're right. We used to, clearly in the Middle East and places, there are lots of places where people can't even ask those questions at risk of their lives, which we should understand. Literally at risk of their lives. But now, we're seeing in the West other kind of questions that people are not allowed to ask at risk to their jobs, their careers, their social standing, and that's really kind of unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the guests I've spoken to recently, the conversations have been centered around the state of academia and just whether it's the nature of the PhD system or more of the for lack of a better phrase, the cancel culture system that seems to be taking place, at least to some extent. So what are your thoughts about the state of academia? Do you think that it's going a dangerous direction in any which way, or?
Oh, yes. I'm often thankful that I'm not at the university anymore. You can just have to look at my writings on my Substack site. I just gave a presentation at Stanford at their classical liberalism seminar, which you can look at, which is about sort of woke science and the dangers of this kind of dogmatic attitude about what's right and wrong and what exists without any evidence, that the claims that science is inherently racist or sexist without any evidence, and most often incorrectly. So, and the point that if you even and the whole bunch of questions you can't ask, the people get fired, faculty get fired for asking those questions, and it's really a dangerous world right now in academia. The orthodoxy, the political correctness orthodoxy. People don't like the word woke. I don't know what other way to describe it, but this political correctness is a fear of offense, fear of offending people. What an awful thing, because and fear of making people uncomfortable. The whole point of education, I've said it so many times for years, decades, the purpose of education is to make us uncomfortable. I hope in our class when I taught you that I both made some people uncomfortable and maybe even offended some others. But I encourage people to speak back and have a discussion about it. And because that's the way we expand, that's the way we learn from each other. And as a faculty member, I learn from students if they made good arguments, and that's the whole point. But academia right now is in a sad situation, and I don't think it's going to improve until administrators get some backbone and be willing to defend freedom of speech and integrity and due process and all the rest. Until the academic community itself realizes how dangerous it is and stops sort of burying their head, which is a natural thing to do. Try and keep your head low and just go on about your own business. And the people who are viciously distorting things are accepted and sometimes extolled. At some point, the community has to start, at the very least, making fun of them, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's definitely a good starting point. And I agree. I mean, sadly, I think it will have to get worse before it gets better. I don't think we're quite at the end of that.
It's going to get worse before it gets better. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to get back to the course. Of course, I enjoyed the course very much. But one thought I had by the end of it was just that I wish that this type of curriculum was taught much earlier on in the educational system. Because for me, when I look at the purpose of early education in science, beyond just to hopefully provoke people to continue it further, is for people to leave with the information just to interface with the world in an accurate and honest way. I mean, you don't have to be a theoretical physicist, but you should understand that everything is made of atoms, and atoms come together to form molecules, and basic evolutionary theory, and so on. And I think what's missing is just the toolbox to engage with it, any scientific topic, regardless of what it is. So do you think, I think there's some programs trying to put courses like yours earlier on, but how would you feel about putting that type of course curriculum as early as elementary school?
Well, I don't know about elementary school, but one thing we should be doing in the curriculum is at all levels, and I don't think it's done enough. I mean, people tend to think of science as a collection of facts. And so what we should really be doing is having classes about, questioning and how to think like a scientist. And it doesn't make science special when I say how to think like a scientist. It applies to all disciplines, applies to all aspects of life. I mean, basing your conclusions on empirical evidence and questioning your ideas and checking them and retesting. So understanding the process of science, I think, is really important. And it can be taught in a lot of different ways, using a lot of different examples. And I think that would be great to have in a high school class. The problem is you need teachers to feel comfortable enough talking about open-ended subjects where we don't know what's going on and people can ask questions and try and say I don't know. Let's find out. And that means and you also have to have curriculum books and those, all of that. It's not at least it's not conducive to modern kind of curricula, but it would be necessary because it needs to be done. Because as I often say, I mean, you don't need to teach a collection of facts. I have more facts than in this phone, or access to it in this phone, than you could ever get in school. But there's more misfacts. The internet is full of misfacts, and what you need is that tools to tell the difference, the tools to separate the wheat from the chaff, and those are the tools that we should be developing. So maybe a course in scientific mysteries, just to show how we uncover knowledge, would be great. But I suppose someone like me should write a text, but I haven't, and I'm not gonna
add it to the list of things you got to get to.
Yeah, well, it might. I think I was once encouraged to write a text for a course like the course I taught for you, and I actually wrote half of it. And then the trouble is, the textbook publishers, they basically just wanted it always to look exactly like the existing texts, the successful ones, because they copy them, and they wanted it to be they wanted to be like that. And so anytime I tried to do anything slightly different, they weren't happy with, and I finally figured that I can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're coming up. We have about 5 minutes before we're out of time. So I'd like to end with a bit of a fun question. So on your podcast, again, you've spoken with everybody who's everybody, frankly, at this point, and I'm sure that will continue to happen.
Hope so.
But if you could go through and pick a few guests from history, a few people who you just, for historical reasons, don't have the chance to get to speak to, who are a few of the people that come to mind?
Oh, yeah, in history, who I would have liked to. Well, obviously Einstein, I would have loved to have got to talk to him. Although I imagine I would have been disappointed. But anyway, and among the physicists, Newton would have been interesting. I mean, he was crazy. I would have been happy to find out how crazy he was.
Yeah.
And it would have been, so it would have been fascinating. My scientific heroes from those days are James Clerk Maxwell, Michael Faraday, who I would like to have spoken to. But then and among writers, I've do writers and directors and everything else. So I loved books by Joseph Heller, Catch-22, and I would have loved to have been able to talk to Joseph Heller while he was still alive. And Thomas Jefferson would have been interesting, I think. I've just been learning about the misconceptions he had, and I would like to have understood better why they had them there. I mean, so there's if I were to go through the list, I could keep going on of fascinating. Galileo, boy, now that would have been interesting. Yeah. And I could go on and on. I would Shakespeare would have been.
Yeah, of course.
And Picasso, I mean, it would have been a very fascinating artist to talk to, I think, and John Lennon. Anyway, it could go on and on.
Laundry list, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll let you go. I really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck with the renovations.
Well, thanks. It's been a fun chance to do this. It's nice to see you doing it. Nice to see that you went on and did a master's degree in some science. It makes me feel happy about helping
Absolutely.
in whatever way I did, encouraging you and the books and stuff. So I'm very pleased to chat with you, and I'm happy. Maybe when the new book comes out, we can chat again. And I wish you the best.